For 6 years, I managed the firewall protecting 50 banking servers. Now you're letting me go because your cousin trusts free antivirus." Wesley Hammond sat behind his mahogany desk, not even having the decency to look uncomfortable. "Yes, today." I placed my keycard on the polished surface, the small piece of plastic representing 6 years of sleepless nights, crisis management, and prevented disasters. Next audit, they'll find out why. Welcome to Payback Office Channel, where corporate decisions meet their consequences, and sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping aside and letting incompetence speak for itself. This is one of those stories where the fallout was so spectacular, it rewrote an entire company's security protocol. If stories like this resonate with you, hitting that subscribe button helps us continue sharing these real accounts of workplace justice. We're building a community on our way to 8,000 subscribers, and your support means we can keep bringing these stories to light. My name is Ivy Rutherford, and until that morning in October, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at Pinnacle Trust Financial, a mid-sized banking institution handling assets worth over $3 billion. I didn't come from a tech dynasty or graduate from an Ivy League school. My mother cleaned houses, and my father worked construction, and they taught me that understanding people's struggles makes you better at protecting what matters to them. That understanding was about to become very relevant. I grew up watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion for every dollar. My mother's employers trusted her with their house keys, their alarm codes, their private spaces. My father's clients trusted him with the structural integrity of their homes. That kind of trust, earned through competence and integrity, was something I understood at a cellular level. So when I entered cybersecurity, I never saw it as just firewalls and encryption. I saw it as protecting the life savings of people like my parents, who couldn't afford to lose a single paycheck to a data breach or ransomware attack. Pinnacle Trust Financial hired me 6 years earlier, right after their previous security setup had been breached by a relatively simple phishing attack. They'd lost customer data, paid significant fines, and their reputation had taken a beating. They wanted someone who could rebuild from the ground up. I spent the first 3 months just assessing the damage and vulnerabilities. The infrastructure was a patchwork of outdated systems, consumer-grade protections on business-critical servers, and a password policy that might as well have been optional. The previous IT security guy had been Wesley's college roommate who thought installing Norton antivirus on the server room computers counted as enterprise protection. I built it back properly. Enterprise-grade firewalls, intrusion detection systems, regular penetration testing, employee security training, multi-factor authentication, encrypted communications, secure backup protocols, and a response plan for every conceivable threat scenario. Within a year, we passed our federal audit with 0 findings. Within 2 years, we became the regional standard for community banking security. Within 3 years, the insurance premiums for our cyber liability coverage dropped by 40% because our security posture was so solid. I wasn't just protecting servers. I was protecting 50,000 customer accounts, their mortgages, their business loans, their retirement savings, their children's college funds. And Wesley Hammond was about to throw all of that away for nepotism. The meeting where I was terminated lasted exactly 11 minutes. Wesley had called me in at 8:30 in the morning, before most of the staff had arrived. Human Resources was represented by Donna Fletcher, who at least had the grace to look deeply uncomfortable. She kept her eyes on the folder in front of her. "Ivy, we're making some changes to the organizational structure," Wesley began, using that corporate language that's designed to obscure rather than clarify. "We're moving in a different direction with our IT security approach." I'd been in the industry long enough to know what that meant. "You're eliminating my position." "We're restructuring. Your role will be absorbed into general IT operations. We've hired Austin Hammond to lead the department. He brings fresh perspectives on cost-effective security solutions." Austin Hammond, the last name wasn't a coincidence. "Your cousin," I said flatly. Wesley's jaw tightened. Austin has a degree in computer science from State University and has been working in IT for 3 years. He's more than qualified. To manage enterprise banking security. 3 years doing what exactly? Donna slid a paper across the desk. Your severance package. 4 weeks of pay, continuation of health benefits for 60 days, and a neutral reference. I didn't touch the paper. What's Austin's actual experience? Wesley stood up, signaling the meeting was ending whether I cooperated or not. That's not your concern anymore. Austin has innovative ideas about maximizing our security budget. He's identified significant cost savings we can achieve with modern solutions. That's when I understood. This wasn't about qualifications or innovation. This was about budget numbers and doing a favor for family. Modern solutions, I repeated. You mean free antivirus software? Wesley's expression confirmed it before he spoke. Enterprise security doesn't require the expensive systems you've implemented. Austin has done extensive research. There are open source and free solutions that provide adequate protection for our needs. Adequate protection. For 50 banking servers holding $3 billion in assets and 50,000 customer accounts. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, though that was present. It was more like watching someone deliberately saw through the branch they're sitting on while insisting they know better than the arborist. Wesley, we're regulated by federal banking standards. The OCC doesn't accept adequate protection. They require documented, tested, enterprise-grade security protocols. Everything I built was designed to meet those requirements. Free antivirus doesn't come with compliance documentation, service-level agreements, or liability coverage. He waved his hand dismissively. Austin is confident he can meet regulatory requirements at a fraction of current costs. We're spending $600,000 annually on security infrastructure and services. He can do it for under $100,000. $600,000 protecting $3 billion in assets. That's 0.02%. It's a rounding error. And the last breach before I was hired cost you $4 million in fines, remediation, and lost business. Donna cleared her throat softly. Ivy, the decision has been made. I looked at her, then at Wesley. He had that expression men in positions of unearned authority often wear when their decisions are questioned by someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Stubborn, defensive, absolutely certain. I could have fought it, could have escalated to the board of directors, could have documented the massive regulatory and security risks, could have made this difficult. But I'd learned something in my 6 years there. Some people have to touch the hot stove themselves. No amount of warning will convince them. They have to feel the burn. When do you want me out? I asked. Wesley looked surprised that I wasn't arguing further. Today, Austin starts Monday. We'd like a clean transition. A clean transition in 2 business days to hand over enterprise banking security. I almost laughed. You're not giving him access to my documentation. Of course we are. Austin will review all your systems and protocols. That's what I was counting on. I stood and picked up the severance paperwork. I'll need this reviewed by an attorney. I'll have an answer by end of business today. Wesley nodded, clearly eager to have this conversation over. That's fine. Donna will coordinate the details. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. The next OCC audit is scheduled for January, 4 months from now. Federal banking regulators don't accept ignorance as an excuse for non-compliance. When they find deficiencies, the fines start at $100,000 and go up from there. Depending on severity, they can restrict your banking charter. Austin is aware of the audit schedule, Wesley said stiffly. Good, then he knows what he's walking into. I handed my keycard to Donna. That little piece of plastic had given me access to the server room, the security office, the executive floor, and every protected system in the building. It had been my responsibility and my burden. Not anymore. I left Wesley's office and went straight to my own, a small space near the IT department with windows overlooking the parking lot. I had 2 hours before Austin would arrive for what Wesley was calling a preliminary orientation meeting. Those 2 hours were critical. I didn't delete anything, didn't sabotage anything, didn't need to. I simply prepared exactly what they'd asked for, a clean transition. I compiled every piece of documentation I'd created over 6 years. Security protocols, threat assessments, incident response plans, vendor contracts, compliance checklists, audit reports, network diagrams, access logs, encryption standards, backup procedures, disaster recovery plans, and training materials. Hundreds of documents, thousands of pages, all meticulously organized and properly labeled. I put it all in the shared drive folder with a note. Complete security documentation for transition, all protocols current as of today. Then I did something else. I sent an email to my personal account. Not company information, nothing proprietary or confidential. Just a simple list of dates. The implementation date of every major security system, the date of our last clean audit, and the scheduled date of the next OCC examination. At 10:30, Austin Hammond arrived. He was 26, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit right, and carrying a leather portfolio that looked fresh out of the packaging. He had Wesley's eyes and the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Donna brought him to my office. "Ivy, this is Austin Hammond. Austin, Ivy Rutherford." We shook hands. His grip was aggressive, trying too hard. "I appreciate you making time for this transition," Austin said, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor. "Of course, I want to make sure the bank's security doesn't lapse." We sat down, and Austin pulled out a tablet. "I've been reviewing the budget numbers. 600,000 seems excessive for a bank of this size. My assessment indicates we can achieve the same security posture for a fraction of that cost." "Your assessment? Have you worked in banking security before?" "I've worked in IT for 3 years at Henderson Tech Solutions. We managed networks for over 50 clients. I understand enterprise environments." Henderson Tech Solutions. I knew them. They were a small managed services provider that handled it for local businesses. Good people, competent work, but nowhere near the complexity or regulatory requirements of banking. "Banking is different," I said carefully. "The regulatory framework alone requires specific security controls that general IT doesn't deal with. We're governed by the OCC, FDIC, GLBA, and depending on the transaction, sometimes SEC regulations. Every security control has to be documented, tested, and proven effective." Austin waved this away. "Regulations are mostly about documentation. The actual security can be achieved with smart configurations and modern free tools. I've done extensive research. There are open-source firewall solutions, free antivirus with enterprise features, cloud-based backup services with free tiers. Wesley and I calculated we can reduce security spending by 83%. 83%. They'd actually done the math on how much they could cut. "And you're confident this meets OCC standards?" I asked. "Absolutely. Security is security. The regulators care about results, not how much you spend." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to end. The regulators absolutely cared about methodology, documentation, and proven enterprise-grade controls. Results alone weren't enough if you couldn't demonstrate your security posture was deliberate, comprehensive, and maintainable. But Austin didn't know what he didn't know. "I've put all my documentation in the shared drive," I said. "Everything you need is there. Security protocols, compliance checklists, vendor contacts, network architecture, incident response procedures." Austin nodded, making notes on his tablet. "Great. I'll review it all, but honestly, I'll probably be implementing my own systems. Fresh start, new approach." "The audit is in January," I reminded him. 4 months, plenty of time to get my systems in place and document everything. These audits are mostly formality if you know what you're doing. I managed not to react to that. The last audit had taken 2 weeks of intensive review, including interviews, system testing, documentation verification, and surprise scenario testing. The auditors had examined everything from our encryption standards to how we disposed of old hard drives. It wasn't a formality. It was a comprehensive examination designed to protect the financial system. We spent another 20 minutes going over basic systems. Austin took notes, but kept interrupting to explain how he would do things differently, more efficiently, more cost-effectively. I answered his questions directly and completely. I gave him access to everything. I held nothing back. When he left, he shook my hand again with that same aggressive grip. Thanks for your time. I'm sure you built a good foundation. I'll take it from here. Good luck, I said, and meant it in the most neutral way possible. By 3 o'clock, I'd signed the severance agreement and cleaned out my desk. 6 years reduced to a box of personal items. A few framed certifications, a coffee mug my team had given me, some reference books, a small plant. Donna walked me out. At the door, she spoke quietly. For what it's worth, I think this is a mistake. Then you should document your concerns in writing to the board. She looked away. I have to pick my battles. I understood. Donna had 2 kids in college and a mortgage. Standing up to Wesley over a security decision she didn't fully understand wasn't worth risking her job. That's how these things happen. Not through malice or conspiracy, but through ordinary people making rational decisions to protect themselves while someone in power makes a catastrophically stupid choice. I walked to my car carrying my box of belongings. It was a clear October afternoon, leaves turning gold and red in the trees lining the parking lot. I felt strangely calm. I'd done my job right up until the moment they took it away. I'd documented everything. I'd offered warnings. I'd provided a complete transition. What happened next wasn't my responsibility anymore. I drove home to my apartment, a modest 2-bedroom place I'd lived in for 4 years. I'd been saving aggressively, living below my means, because I understood that job security in the corporate world was an illusion. I had 8 months of expenses saved. Unemployment would extend that to over a year if needed. I wasn't worried about finding another job. The cybersecurity field had far more openings than qualified professionals. My resume included managing security for a $3 billion financial institution with perfect audit results. I'd have offers within weeks. But first, I wanted to see how this played out. I spent the weekend updating my resume, refreshing my LinkedIn profile, and reaching out to my professional network. By Monday morning, I had 3 recruiter calls scheduled and 2 direct inquiries from former colleagues who'd moved to other institutions. Austin Hammond started his first day as Director of Information Security at Pinnacle Trust Financial that same Monday. I knew because Stephanie Wallace, one of the senior IT administrators, texted me. Stephanie, new boss started today. Spent first hour explaining why our firewall is overkill. I'm updating my resume. Me, document everything. Cover yourself. Stephanie already started a folder. This is going to be bad, isn't it? Me, probably, but not your fault if you document your objections. Stephanie, he wants to switch to open source firewall by end of month. Said Enterprise, firewalls are scams by big companies. I put my phone down and sat back. End of month. Austin was moving even faster than I'd anticipated. Enterprise firewalls aren't scams. They're comprehensive security appliances that include intrusion prevention, deep packet inspection, threat intelligence integration, application-level filtering, VPN capabilities, and most critically, vendor support and liability coverage. When configured correctly, they form the first line of defense against external threats. Open-source firewalls can be excellent tools. In the hands of an expert who understands networking, security protocols, threat modeling, and regulatory compliance, they can be configured to be highly effective. Austin was not that expert. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephanie kept me loosely informed. Not because I asked, but because she was processing what she was watching happen and needed someone who understood the implications. Austin had eliminated the enterprise firewall maintenance contract, saving $200,000 annually. He'd canceled the intrusion detection system subscription, saving $90,000. He'd terminated the security awareness training program, saving $40,000. He'd ended the penetration testing contract, saving $50,000. He'd switched from enterprise antivirus to a free solution, saving $75,000. He was a hero in Wesley's eyes, having cut the security budget by over 60% in his first month. He'd also introduced vulnerabilities that wouldn't be apparent until someone exploited them, created compliance gaps that wouldn't be discovered until the audit, and eliminated early warning systems that were designed to catch attacks before they succeeded. But the cost savings looked great in the monthly executive report. In early November, I accepted a position as Chief Information Security Officer at Westfield Community Bank, a similar-sized institution 2 states away. Better pay, better benefits, and a board of directors that actually understood that security was an investment, not an expense. I gave myself 2 weeks before starting, a brief break after 6 years of high-stress work. During that break, on a Tuesday afternoon, Stephanie called me. "Ivy, something's wrong with the network. Everything's running slow. Austin says it's just high traffic, but I've never seen patterns like this." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Unusual outbound traffic. Consistent data transfers to external IP addresses. Austin disabled most of the monitoring systems because he said they created unnecessary overhead, so I can't get detailed logs, but something feels wrong." "Did you tell him?" "He said I was being paranoid. Said the free antivirus would have caught anything malicious. He actually said our old systems made everyone jumpy over normal network activity." Unusual outbound traffic. Consistent transfers. That was exfiltration. Someone or something was moving data out of the network. "Stephanie, document everything you're seeing. Screenshots, whatever logs you can access, timestamps, email it to your personal account." "You think we're compromised?" "I think you should protect yourself. If Austin won't investigate and something's actually wrong, you don't want to be the one who gets blamed for not catching it." "This is so messed up. We never had these issues when you were here." We ended the call. I sat looking out my apartment window at the city skyline. I could call Wesley directly, warn him, but he'd made it clear my expertise wasn't valued. He'd chosen to trust his cousin's research over my 6 years of proven results. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. 3 days later, on Friday morning, Stephanie texted me a single word: "Locked." I called her. She answered in a whisper. "Ransomware, every server, everything's encrypted. There's a message on every computer demanding payment in cryptocurrency. $5 million. Austin is in Wesley's office. The whole executive team is there. It's chaos." Ransomware. The nightmare scenario for any organization, and absolutely catastrophic for a bank. "What about backups?" I asked, though I already knew. "Austin moved us to a cloud backup service, free tier, but he configured it wrong. The ransomware encrypted the cloud backups too because they were mounted as network drives. That was a rookie mistake. Backups have to be isolated and immutable precisely to prevent ransomware from destroying them. I'd had our backups on a separate system with air-gapped offline copies for exactly this reason." "What about the incident response plan?" I asked. "Austin said he was going to update it but hadn't gotten to it yet. Nobody knows what to do. We can't access customer accounts. We can't process transactions. The branches can't operate. We're just locked." "You need to call the FBI. Ransomware attacks on financial institutions have to be reported, and you need forensics specialists to preserve evidence and assess the breach." I told Austin that. He said involving the FBI would make it worse. He wants to pay the ransom and keep this quiet. Pay the ransom. That was possibly the worst choice he could make. Even setting aside the ethical issues of funding criminal enterprises, paying ransom doesn't guarantee file recovery, often leads to repeat attacks, and in the case of a regulated financial institution, creates additional legal problems. "Stephanie, I can't make decisions for Pinnacle anymore, but you should know that federal banking regulations require breach notification. If customer data was accessed, you have specific timeframes for reporting to regulators and affected customers. Trying to keep this quiet could turn a security incident into a criminal cover-up. Can you talk to Wesley? He might listen to you now." He made it very clear my input wasn't welcome, but if the board of directors calls me, I'll tell them the truth. We ended the call. I felt no satisfaction. This wasn't a win. 50,000 customers were potentially compromised. Employees like Stephanie, who'd done nothing wrong, were dealing with the crisis. The community that depended on Pinnacle for mortgages, business loans, and financial services was being hurt. Austin's incompetence and Wesley's nepotism were causing real harm to real people. Within 2 hours, the story broke. A bank employee, probably someone in the branches who couldn't access customer accounts, had talked to local media. By evening, it was regional news. By the next morning, it was a case study in cybersecurity, failure being discussed in industry forums. The forensic investigation, when competent professionals were finally brought in, revealed what had happened. Austin had replaced the enterprise firewall with an open-source solution he'd configured himself. But he'd misconfigured critical rules, leaving several ports exposed that should have been restricted. He'd disabled the intrusion detection system that would have caught the initial probe. The ransomware had entered through a phishing email, which would have been caught by the email security filtering I'd had in place. Austin had switched to the free tier of an email service that had minimal filtering to save money. Once inside the network, the malware had spread laterally, exploiting vulnerabilities that would have been caught by the regular patching schedule and vulnerability scanning I'd maintained. Austin had decided that automatic patching was disruptive, and vulnerability scanning was unnecessary if you were careful. The attackers had been inside the network for over 2 weeks before deploying the ransomware, slowly exfiltrating customer data the entire time. The monitoring systems I'd implemented would have flagged that activity within hours. Austin had disabled them because they generated too many alerts he didn't understand. Every single point of failure was a security control that Austin had eliminated to cut costs. The forensics report was devastating. Not just ransomware, but a massive data breach. Names, social security numbers, account numbers, transaction histories, loan applications. Everything. Over 50,000 customers fully compromised. The regulatory response was swift and brutal. The OCC launched an emergency examination. The FDIC got involved because customer deposits were at risk. State banking regulators opened their own investigation. The FBI's cybercrime division took over the criminal investigation. Pinnacle Trust Financial was looking at fines that would likely exceed $10 million. They faced mandatory security improvements under regulatory order. They had to offer credit monitoring to every affected customer. They were defending multiple class action lawsuits. And they had to notify every single customer that their personal financial information had been stolen. The board of directors fired Wesley Hammond 3 weeks after the breach. They fired Austin the same day. Donna Fletcher, who'd stayed silent when she had concerns, was reassigned. The board brought in a crisis management firm and an interim CEO with banking experience. And then they called me. I was 2 weeks into my new position at Westfield Community Bank when I got the call from Thomas Ashworth, chairman of Pinnacle's board. Miss Rutherford, I'm calling to apologize and to ask for your help. I sat in my new office, smaller than my old one but with a better view, and listened. The board was not consulted on the decision to terminate your employment or hire Austin Hammond. Wesley made that decision unilaterally, which he had authority to do for positions below executive level. We've since learned that was a catastrophic error in judgment. I appreciate the apology, Mr. Ashworth, but I'm currently employed. We'd like you to return as Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the board rather than through the CEO. Name your salary. We'll triple your previous benefits package. We need someone who can rebuild what we've lost and guide us through the regulatory remediation. It was tempting. There was a certain appeal to riding back in as the solution to the disaster I'd warned them about. But I'd learned something too. I'd spent 6 years building something good, and it had been destroyed in weeks because one person with authority valued cost savings over competence. That could happen again, board oversight or not. I'm going to decline, Mr. Ashworth. I appreciate the offer, but I've accepted a position where security is valued from the top down. I'd suggest you look for someone with banking security experience and give them actual authority to do the job right. There was a long pause. Would you at least consult with us, help us understand what we need to rebuild? I can recommend several excellent consultants who specialize in breach remediation and regulatory compliance. After we ended the call, I sent Thomas Ashworth contact information for 3 consulting firms I trusted. All of them would charge substantial fees, but they'd do the work properly. Then I sent a message to Stephanie. She was still at Pinnacle, part of the team working to rebuild. She deserved to know the board had reached out. Stephanie, did you turn them down? Me, I did. I'm happy where I am. Stephanie, can't say I blame you. It's still a disaster here. I'm looking for other positions. Me, send me your resume. Westfield is hiring security analysts. Stephanie, really, I'd work with you again in a heartbeat. Me, email it over. No guarantees, but I'll make sure it gets a serious review. She sent her resume within an hour. I forwarded it to our HR director with a strong recommendation. Stephanie was competent, thorough, and had the integrity to push back against bad decisions even when it was uncomfortable. 2 weeks later, Stephanie accepted a position on my team at Westfield. Her first day, we had coffee in the break room. Thank you for this, she said. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every day felt like cleaning up a disaster that didn't have to happen. You tried to warn Austin. You documented your concerns. You did everything right. I should have pushed harder, should have gone over his head. I shook my head. You would have been fired for insubordination, and the breach would have happened anyway. Some people have to fail before they learn, and some people have authority they haven't earned. You can't fix that from the bottom. Did you know it would end like this? That was a fair question. Had I known? Not specifically. I hadn't known there would be a ransomware attack or a massive breach. But had I known that Austin's approach would lead to serious security failures that would have significant consequences? Yes, that was predictable. I knew eliminating enterprise security controls to save money would create vulnerabilities, I said. I didn't know exactly how or when they'd be exploited, but in banking, the question isn't if you'll be attacked. It's when. And whether you'll be ready. Stephanie nodded slowly. Wesley's been subpoenaed. There's talk of criminal negligence charges for knowingly putting customer data at risk. I'd read about that. Federal prosecutors were investigating whether Wesley's decision to slash security spending, despite warnings, rose to the level of criminal negligence given his fiduciary duty to protect customer information. Austin faced similar scrutiny, though his defense would likely be incompetence rather than negligence, which somehow seemed both more accurate and more damning. That's between them and the legal system, I said. We have our own work to focus on. And we did. Westfield Community Bank took security seriously, but they'd been operating with a small IT department that did their best with limited resources. I had budget approval to build a proper security program, hire a team, and implement the kind of comprehensive protections that actually worked. Over the next 6 months, I hired 4 security analysts, including Stephanie, implemented a modern security architecture, established training programs, and built relationships with regulators based on transparency and competence. We passed our OCC audit with minor findings, all of which we remediated within weeks. Meanwhile, Pinnacle Trust Financial's story became a cautionary tale in the banking industry. The breach, the regulatory fines, the lawsuits, and the criminal investigations were covered in trade publications, industry conferences, and cybersecurity training programs. The total cost to Pinnacle exceeded $40 million when all the fines, legal fees, remediation costs, and settlements were tallied. They lost 30% of their customer base. Their stock price, for the portion of the bank that was publicly traded, dropped 67%. The board eventually sold the bank to a larger regional institution at a significant loss. Most of the employees kept their jobs through the acquisition, but Pinnacle Trust Financial, as an independent institution, ceased to exist. All to save $600,000 annually on security. Wesley Hammond faced federal charges, but ultimately accepted a plea deal that included significant fines, a permanent ban from serving in any fiduciary capacity in banking, and 2 years of probation. No prison time, but his career in finance was over. Austin Hammond faced civil liability from the class action lawsuits. His personal assets were limited, but the judgment against him would follow him for years. His career in it, especially in any capacity touching sensitive data, was effectively finished. Donna Fletcher found another HR position at a different company. Before she left Pinnacle, she sent me a message apologizing for not speaking up when she knew the decision to fire me was wrong. I appreciated the gesture, even though it didn't change anything. The regulators used Pinnacle as a case study in their examination of how banks manage cybersecurity risk. They issued new guidance emphasizing that cost alone couldn't drive security decisions, that qualified personnel were essential, and that boards of directors had to maintain active oversight of security programs. One regulatory official, speaking at a conference I attended, used language that seemed directly pulled from Pinnacle's disaster. The question isn't whether you can find cheaper security solutions. The question is whether those solutions actually protect your institution and your customers. False economy in cybersecurity doesn't save money. It just determines how you'll spend much more later. 18 months after I was fired, I was invited to speak at the National Banking Security Conference about building effective security programs in mid-sized financial institutions. I accepted. In preparing my presentation, I had to decide how directly to address the Pinnacle situation. It was the elephant in the room. Everyone in banking security knew the story. Many knew I'd been the CISO, who'd been fired right before the breach. I decided to address it directly, but professionally. Some of you know I was CISO at Pinnacle Trust Financial until a few months before their breach, I began. I'm not going to litigate what happened there. That's being done in actual courts and regulatory proceedings. But I will say this, the single most important element of effective security isn't technology. It's organizational commitment from the top. You can have the best firewalls, the most sophisticated monitoring, the most comprehensive policies, and it means nothing if leadership doesn't value security enough to maintain it. And conversely, you can have unlimited budget and cutting-edge tools, and still fail if you don't have competent people who understand the threat landscape and regulatory requirements. Security is ultimately about trust. Customers trust us with their financial lives. Regulators trust us to operate safely within the financial system. Employees trust us to give them the tools and support to do their jobs properly. That trust has to be earned through consistent competence, and it can be destroyed very quickly through negligence or arrogance. The presentation was well received. Afterward, several other CISOs approached me privately to share their own stories of fighting budget cuts, explaining basic security concepts to executives who didn't want to hear it, and documenting concerns to protect themselves when leadership made risky decisions. The common thread was always the same. The technical aspects of security were challenging, but the organizational and political aspects were often harder. One CISO from a bank in the Southwest told me his CEO had questioned why they needed to spend money on security when they hadn't been breached. I told him that's like asking why we need to spend money on brakes when we haven't crashed, he said. He didn't appreciate the analogy, but the board backed me up. That was the key, board-level support. Without it, even the best CISO was vulnerable to cost-cutting executives who saw security as overhead rather than investment. Everything I'd built at Pinnacle, I rebuilt at Westfield, but this time it stayed built. I still think about those 50,000 Pinnacle customers whose information was stolen. People like my parents, working hard and trusting their bank to protect what they'd earned. They were the real victims of Wesley's arrogance and Austin's incompetence. Some of them lost money to fraud before the breach was discovered. Some spent years dealing with identity theft. Some lost trust in banking institutions entirely and kept their money in less secure places as a result. That's the human cost of treating security as optional. I also think about the Pinnacle employees who did nothing wrong but lost their jobs when the bank was sold. The tellers, the loan officers, the IT staff who tried to work with inadequate tools and leadership that didn't listen. Stephanie told me that morale had been terrible in those final months. Everyone knew something was wrong, but Austin dismissed concerns and Wesley backed him up. The people who spoke up were told they were resistant to change. The people who stayed quiet felt complicit. It's a pattern I've seen too often in corporate disasters. The warning signs are visible. The competent people raise concerns. Leadership ignores them because acknowledging the concerns would require admitting a mistake or changing course. And then everyone acts surprised when the predictable disaster occurs. 10 years after I was fired from Pinnacle Trust Financial, I was invited to give a keynote address at the National Banking Conference. The title was Building Resilient Security Programs in an Era of Evolving Threats. I accepted the invitation and spent weeks preparing. The audience would be CEOs, board members, and senior executives from banks across the country. This was my opportunity to influence how leadership thought about security. I structured the talk around 3 principles. First, security is a business enabler, not a cost center. Customers choose financial institutions they trust. Regulators allow institutions to operate based on demonstrated safety and soundness. Investors value companies with strong risk management. Effective security enables all of that. Second, expertise matters. Security is a specialized field requiring continuous learning and deep knowledge. Treating it as something anyone with general IT experience can handle is like asking a general practitioner to perform brain surgery. The stakes are too high for on-the-job learning. Third, organizational culture determines security outcomes more than technology. You can have the best tools in the world, but if leadership doesn't value security, if employees aren't trained, if concerns are dismissed, and if cost-cutting overrides risk management, you'll fail. Toward the end of the talk, I told the Pinnacle story. Not to shame anyone or claim vindication, but as an illustration of what happens when those 3 principles are violated. A mid-sized bank eliminated their qualified security leadership to cut costs and hired an unqualified family member. Within months, they suffered a catastrophic breach that cost $40 million and destroyed the institution. This wasn't bad luck or a sophisticated attack. It was the predictable result of treating security as optional. I showed a slide with a quote from the regulatory report. The institution's security failures were entirely preventable. Management chose cost reduction over risk management, ignored warnings from qualified staff, and created an environment where concerns were dismissed rather than addressed. The people who made those decisions faced some consequences, I continued. The CEO was banned from banking. The unqualified security director faced lawsuits. But the customers who lost their information and the employees who lost their jobs faced worse consequences despite doing nothing wrong. As leaders, you have the power to make decisions that affect thousands of people. That power comes with responsibility. When you're making decisions about security spending, you're not just choosing between budget line items. You're choosing how much you value the trust your customers place in you. I'm not suggesting unlimited security budgets or paranoid risk avoidance. I'm suggesting informed decision-making based on actual expertise, regulatory requirements, and genuine threat assessment. Sometimes cost-cutting is appropriate, but it should be done by people who understand what they're cutting and what risks they're accepting. The talk was well received. During the Q&A, a CEO from a regional bank asked, "How do board members who aren't security experts know if they're getting good advice from their security leadership?" "Ask about regulatory compliance first," I said. "If you're in banking, there are specific requirements you must meet. Your security leadership should be able to explain how your controls meet those requirements. Second, ask about testing and validation. Security isn't theoretical. It should be regularly tested through audits, penetration testing, and exercises. Third, ask about incident response. Not if you'll face a security incident, but when and how you'll respond. If your security leadership can't answer those questions clearly, that's a red flag." Another attendee asked, "What should we do if we discover our security program has serious gaps?" "Fix them immediately and document the remediation." Regulators and courts are more lenient with organizations that identify problems and address them proactively than with those that ignore known risks. The Pinnacle situation was worse because staff had raised concerns that were dismissed. If someone in your organization is raising security concerns, investigate them seriously. After the talk, several executives approached me privately. Some shared their own stories of security challenges and difficult decisions. Some asked for recommendations for security leadership. Some just wanted to express that the Pinnacle story had changed how they thought about security at their institutions. One CEO told me, "I was pushing our security director to cut spending before this conference. After your talk, I'm going to have a very different conversation with our board about what adequate security actually requires." That conversation alone made the keynote worthwhile. I'm asked sometimes if I'm bitter about what happened at Pinnacle. If I resent being fired for doing my job competently while watching the institution collapse under incompetent leadership. The honest answer is complicated. I'm angry about the harm to innocent customers and employees. I'm frustrated that preventable disasters keep happening because organizations don't learn from others' mistakes. I'm disappointed that expertise is often undervalued, while confidence is rewarded. But bitter? No. Being fired from Pinnacle led me to Westfield, where I've built something sustainable and been given opportunities to influence the broader industry. I've taught students who will go on to protect organizations properly. I've advised regulators on policies that make the financial system safer. I've helped other organizations avoid Pinnacle's mistakes. If I'd stayed at Pinnacle, I would have been another victim of that breach, probably blamed for not preventing what my successor caused. Leaving, even involuntarily, put me in a position to do more meaningful work. That's the strange outcome of this story. The people who made catastrophic decisions destroyed what they were trying to save. The person they fired as a cost-cutting measure went on to greater success and influence. The expertise they dismissed became more valuable because their failure proved why it mattered. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well and doing good work. The banking industry is safer now than it was 10 years ago. Not because threats have decreased, they've actually increased, but because institutions have learned, often through painful examples like Pinnacle, that security isn't optional. Board-level security oversight is now standard at most banks. Security leadership positions require demonstrated expertise. Regulatory examination of cybersecurity programs is more rigorous. Industry collaboration on threat intelligence has improved. These changes didn't happen because of any one person or incident. They happened because enough disasters accumulated that the system had to evolve. But Pinnacle was one of those disasters that made evolution necessary. And in some small way, my 6 years building a solid security program, my warnings before being fired, and my work afterward to share lessons learned, contributed to that evolution. That's what I hold on to when I think about those 50,000 customers whose information was stolen, or the employees who lost their jobs, or the community that lost their local bank. Their suffering wasn't meaningless. It drove changes that protected millions of other customers at thousands of other institutions. That doesn't make it right or fair, but it gives it purpose. Ivy Rutherford, the girl whose mother cleaned houses and whose father worked construction, who learned that protecting people's trust was sacred, ended up protecting far more than 50,000 bank customers. Through teaching, advisory work, speaking engagements, and policy influence, the lessons from Pinnacle's failure have reached the entire banking industry. Not despite being fired, but in some ways because of it. That's the real payback. Not revenge against individuals, but systemic improvement that makes the betrayal of trust harder to repeat. If you found this story valuable, consider subscribing. We share real workplace stories where competence, integrity, and sometimes just stepping aside and letting consequences unfold leads to accountability. We're building toward 8,000 subscribers who believe that expertise matters and that organizations that value cost-cutting over competence should face the natural results of that choice. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these important lessons from the front lines of corporate America.